Well, let's go ahead and start this morning with a quick question. By a show of hands, how many people here this morning can say that they remember every person that they graduated high school with? Okay, we got 2 people. I had a feeling that even in this small of a group, it would be a very small turnout. I wouldn't have been surprised if no one raised their hands to that question. Now, I also get to raise my hand to that question as well. I can remember graduating with every person I graduated with because I graduated with a class of 11 people. Now, for more context, my entire high school was smaller than most people's graduating class. And in fact, our whole K through 12 was also smaller than many of my friends' graduating class, much, much smaller. And so when I was in high school, I loved playing sports, but being in such a small school like that, playing sports was pretty limited because if you didn't know, most of the sports required you have a certain amount of people. You can't have a football team if you can't put enough people out on the field, right? And so in the school setting that I grew up in, there were only two sports that I could play, which were basketball and soccer. And it just so happened I loved both of those sports, so it worked out. And being in a school so small, it was near impossible, not completely impossible, to not make the team. So pretty much everyone who came out and tried out, you got to be on the team. So it was a win-win situation there. In my senior year of high school, our basketball team only had 7 players on it. Now, a full lineup for a basketball team is 10 players, but 7 was all we could muster. Now, our starting 5 in our basketball team were all seniors, and they for sure were the best players that our school could have possibly mustered for this team. And then our bench actually was composed of junior high basketball players. And so we were in a really limited position. But when it came to talent, our little group actually had some decent basketball players. But we were at one major disadvantage, which was a major disadvantage, and that was size. Now, I'm not a particularly short person, but I'm also not a particularly tall person. With that context, I had to play center on our basketball team, which, if you don't know, is the largest position on the basketball court. And so I'm the biggest guy on our basketball team. So it goes to show that our size was pretty small. Even though we were playing other Christian schools, their centers typically were bigger than me. Not much bigger than me, but at least a few inches. And I was much thinner back then, and so they weighed a little bit more than me. And so I always had to kind of battle it out with these guys who were somewhat bigger than me, but I could overall handle my own. Now, there was one game in particular where this wasn't the case. I've mentioned before that I went to a small little independent fundamental Baptist school. And so we played typically just other little small independent fundamental Baptist schools as well. But on this off occasion, we played this random Lutheran school that we were completely unfamiliar with. And so they show up, and they also have a small roster. They don't have a full 10-person roster. And so it was clear that it would be a good matchup, except they had one little surprise that we couldn't anticipate. Their center, the largest guy on their team, he ended up coming to the basketball court after everybody was pretty much already out there for warm-ups. He came out to warm up, and he was 6'8". And so, just massive. And remember, I am the biggest guy on our team, so I am going to have to match up with this guy who is 6'8". And you could just see it on his face. He had this certain confidence looking over at us that he kind of knew what was going to happen. And I remember looking at him kind of in disbelief, like, I'm supposed to try to guard this guy. I have no idea how this is about to happen. And again, the disbelief wasn't because of just his height. I had seen people of that height in person before. But again, it was the fact that I had to match up with him. And so at the beginning of the game, the centers come together in the middle of the court to do the jump ball. And so again, I come up and I'm standing face to chest with this guy, and both of us have no question on who is going to win this jump ball. And so, of course, I don't even really try. He gets the ball. And as the game went on, it was very clear that the team was going to favor this mismatch. As they would bring the ball down the court, Whoever it was would immediately look to see where he was at, just to throw the ball up and get it over to him. And again, he was big and he was strong. And no matter what I did, no matter how low I tried to go on him and get the leverage, no matter what, he just worked right through me. I mean, just with like a knife through butter. And so as the game went on, eventually the next largest guy on our team decided that it was time to start trying to help me. And so we would start trying to double team him. And so this meant another person on the team would be left open. But that didn't even matter because they had no intention of going to that open guy. They didn't care that there were two people now on this big fella. They kept throwing the ball up higher than we could get to, where only he could get it. And then again, he would just move forcefully, again with his size. And he would move both of us out of the way. There was just absolutely nothing we could do. Now, I don't remember the score of that game. We definitely lost. But the one thing I do remember clearly is the severe beatdown that guy gave me in that game. You know, when you come into the presence of someone who has height like that, who has stature like that, they tend to grab the attention of a room. You know, if a really tall guy comes walking in, it's just natural for your eyes to go and look and be like, wow, that guy is tall. Or maybe you're at the gym and there's somebody who has just been lifting for years and is just huge. You know, wearing that like small tank top, walking around, arms can't touch his sides, right? Because his arms are so big. All eyes are going to be on him. Or say when you watch the Olympics and the speed racing comes on, and these guys who can just run at tremendous speeds begin to run. It is absolutely breathtaking to see them reach these speeds that many of us can only get to in our cars, right? And so there's a type of awe that comes with beholding such great excellence, physical excellence. Now, there's this old saying that says there's always someone who is better, right? There's always someone better than you. But there are moments in history where we see these physical feats, where we see someone who has just physical excellence that seemingly will never be recreated. And those moments that we witness convey a certain splendor that captivates the attention of the onlooker. Now, our text this morning is drawing us to do the same thing. Our text is drawing us to cast our eyes, our fixation upon a certain splendor. So often, I think when we think of the splendor of God, it can be hard to materialize it, right? Because God is spirit, right? We talk about God, your Holy Spirit is welcome here, right? And we don't see His presence, but we know His presence. But sometimes it can be, again, hard to materialize the splendor of God. But our text this morning draws our attention to the displays of God's splendor so that we might be fixated on how truly unique and marvelous He is. I mean, again, this is the whole reason that's led me this desire to do this class in September on classical theism, on exploring the nature, the greatness, the splendor of God. Because it's something that once we see, it's hard to take our gaze off of. We become captivated by it. It stirs our hearts up for Him. And so the truth that you need to see this morning from the text is this, that the Lord moves with matchless majesty. The Lord moves with matchless majesty. As we behold a person that accomplishes a great physical feat, we behold that with great awe. So the Scriptures call us to look upon the Lord, both His stature and His works, and grow in our awe of Him. This morning, we see a true display of God's unique splendor. Again, a majesty that cannot be matched by anything else in the created order. I hope our hearts would be stirred as the prophet's heart was stirred when taking in these wonderful realities. I mean, you can just, as we go through the text, you're just going to feel it, right? You're going to feel the awe that Habakkuk is writing with. And so look back with me at our text as we see two images to dwell on as to why God's splendor is completely unique to Him. Start back with me here in verse 1. It says, "A prayer of Habakkuk the prophet, according to the Shigionoth. O Lord, I have heard the report of you and your work. O Lord, do I fear? In the midst of the years revive it. In the midst of the years make it known. In wrath remember mercy. God came from Teman, and the Holy One from Mount Paran, Selah. His splendor covered the heavens, and the earth was filled of his praise. His brightness was like the light. Rays flashed from his hand, and there he veiled his power. Before him went pestilence, and plague followed at his heels. He stood and measured the earth. He looked and shook the nations. Then the eternal mountains were scattered. The everlasting hills sank low. His were the everlasting ways. I saw the tents of Cushan in affliction. The curtains of the land in Midian did tremble. And so the first image that we need to dwell on this morning is that creation bows at the splendor of God's presence. Creation bows at the splendor of God's presence. You know, this section here, chapter 3, marks the final section of the book. Again, this is a very short little book, but a very impactful book. And this section begins with an interesting detail that we need to take note of. It says, this is a prayer of Habakkuk the prophet. Okay, so thus far in Habakkuk, we've seen him pray twice already. And so this is a third prayer. And so what makes this prayer unique? Is there something unique about this prayer? Well, what happens next makes it unique. According to the Shigionoth. The last term here, Shigionoth, conveys that important thing. This term conveys that this prayer is to be set to music. This isn't just a prayer that's simply to be read, but it's supposed to be a song. It's supposed to be a hymn, a psalm that is given up to the Lord. This prayer is to be viewed as Habakkuk's worship before God. And as the text goes on, the prophet brings his reason for this worship. We see that he says, Lord, I have heard the report of you and your work. O Lord, do I fear? And so there are these two things that the prophet hears, that the prophet encounters, that leads him to this posture of praise. That leads him to this song of adoration before God. He has heard of God himself, and he has heard of his work. So he has heard the report of you and of your work. And he says that at the hearing of God and his work, that he now fears. Now clearly, this isn't a type of fear that drives him to the hills to hide and to not be in that connection with the Lord. But there's this healthy adoration, this healthy sense of beholding God and who he is and how he is not like God, that God is truly unique. And he recognizes this in his own context as he stands before the Lord in his character. What he is saying is he hasn't encountered the mediocre, right? He hasn't encountered the ordinary, the everyday. Rather, he has witnessed the unbelievable, the unfathomable, the thing that is unlike anything else. He is in complete awe of God. His whole person responds. This word of fear, really speaks to this whole person mentality that he stands before the Lord and he is just brought low because God is brought high. You know, when I was younger, I remember visiting Tequamanon Falls. Has anybody ever been to Tequamanon Falls? Yeah, I see a few hands. Tequamanon Falls is pretty spectacular. An interesting fact about the falls is that the upper falls span over 200 feet wide and have a 48-foot drop, which makes it one of the largest waterfalls east of the Mississippi River. It really is remarkable to stand before them, to just see the water as it pours forth, just the volume, the power that just rolls off. There's this sense of awe and standing before it and recognizing the great power. And this is the place that Habakkuk finds himself in. Right? He has witnessed the splendor of God. Right? He has stood before him, and his breath has just been taken away. There's this healthy fear that comes upon him. And so the prayer shifts from Habakkuk's initial awe, the taking in of this thing, to describing what he has heard. So he goes into now what the report of God and his work is. And he begins this by appreciating the sheer appearance of God, his sheer presence as it comes onto the scene. What we're given here is actually a recollection of God's saving work when God saves Israel from Egypt. Right? This would have been a story that was quick to the minds of all Israelites. especially his prophets. And so this image we see is God descending from his heavenly abode, his great heavenly kingdom, his throne, to act on behalf of his people, to work out their salvation. The prophet uses here what we would call anthropomorphic language, which is a fancy term for stating that using the physical things of this earth to describe spiritual things. Right? And the reason why the Scriptures does this is actually God's grace to us, because the reality is that God is, and who he is and his power and what he does is far beyond our comprehension, that he actually reveals himself in terms that our little minds can relate to. That is a wonderful grace of the Lord, that he would speak in such language, because God isn't one who has a hand or a foot. He is spirit. But he uses this language so that we, his creation, might be able to relate to him. While God, again, doesn't have that physical body, we need this for our context. And so the coming of God's presence is described here as his splendor covered the heavens, and the earth was filled with his praise. His brightness was like the light. Rays flashed from his hand, and there he veiled his power. Wow. The splendor of the Lord's coming is described as the majesty of the sun's rising. I mean, just think about a sunrise. Think about sitting there with a cup of coffee, and it's still dark out, and you can sense the light is coming, but it hasn't quite penetrated the darkness yet. But as soon as it comes up over the horizon, as soon as the brilliance of the sun can be seen, the darkness flees. The rays of the sun shoot across the horizon, and the darkness goes. As the presence of God comes upon the nations, just as the presence of the sun comes upon the land, the text says that the Lord looked and shook the nations. Then the eternal mountains were scattered, and the everlasting hills sank low. I mean, again, this language, this poetic language that's seeking to take these real deep spiritual realities and bring them to a tangible example for us are hard to comprehend. I mean, it's remarkable language. The idea of mountains scattering is something that doesn't logically make sense. I mean, how many people in here have seen a mountain scatter? How many people have seen a mountain get up and go and run? I say, if I saw any hands on that one, I know you're lying to me. But these aren't just any mountains either. They're described as the eternal mountains. Right? That these mountains have remained in this place forever. That nothing has moved them, nothing has shooken them. But then the Lord and his presence and his splendor come, and we see that the eternal mountains scatter. However, at the mere presence, we see that they flee, and we see that the eternal hills sink low as if they're bowing to him. What powerful language here. It says that the eternal hills sink low. Right? They can't help but go down before God. I mean, creation here is literally bowing before God in his coming presence. That is God. And it's of vital importance that we see God in the light that Scripture has revealed him. I mean, the glorious realities that the Lord, he speaks to us by his Holy Spirit through his word, and he has revealed himself in these pages because he has revealed himself in real time. And he takes these truths and he stirs our hearts up with them. And so as we behold this splendor this morning, we need to grasp onto it. We need to lock onto it. Because I say this because if we don't see God for who he truly is, then we will never worship him the way that he deserves. Our worship, if we have a shallow view of God, our worship is going to be shallow. You know, worship isn't simply a matter of coming into church on Sunday mornings and singing songs, but rather worship is worthship. Right? And actually the song we were singing this morning, you know, that every breath belongs to him. Right? That really reflects this idea of worship. Right? That our very breaths that we take can lead to the worship of God, the worship of him. Because just as we come here on a Sunday morning, as we set our alarm clocks and we get up and we take the shower, we eat breakfast, we get over here, maybe stop at Starbucks for, a coffee, whatever. We come here to gather with other believers in the presence of God because he is worthy of that. He is worthy of it. And yes, it is good for us, and God brings us together as his body, but it is because he is worthy of it. He's not doing any favors for us. He's not there to do favors for us, right? This isn't primarily about us. This is primarily about him. Right? And so that's the thing, is that our worship, our view of his worthship is going to be low and diminished if we don't see him for who he is, if we don't behold his splendor and take it in and be awe-filled. It's just simple as that. If we decide to turn ourselves from it, if we decide not to acknowledge it, to look to it, to not love it, to not embrace it, it's going to pass us by. Right? We're going to choose other things over it. But I believe that as we take in his splendor, worship will become our way of living. Every breath will be given unto him. If our worship of God is to grow, again, it isn't going to come from a sense of duty. I mean, certainly we can have a misconstrued idea of what it means to come and gather on Sunday mornings as if we're doing something to please the Lord, or we're doing something to earn favor with him. And then if we're not there on the next Sunday, then he must be mad at me now. Or we can come to these false conclusions. The reality is that is coming from a sense of duty. We put coming to church as an event on the calendar, and we can make that a white-knuckled discipline. Absolutely. But worship only truly grows as we plant ourselves in the awe-filled splendor of God. And so my prayer this morning is that our hearts would grow with a yearning to see him. Or that we would pray deeply, that the Lord would stir our hearts up to want to see more of him, to see him clearly. Because he has revealed himself to us, but not just here, out there. Right? The scriptures tell us that he has revealed himself plainly in creation. My hope would be that we would open up the Bible and we would see the powerful works of God, and that we would be, that is our God. But that we would also look up at the stars in the sky and remember the one who put them there and go, that is my God. Again, that his splendor would consume our lives, that our lives might pour out in worship to him. Look back with me at our text starting in verse 8. Was your wrath against the rivers, O Lord? Was your anger against the rivers? Or your indignation against the sea when you rode on your horses, on your chariot of salvation? You stripped the sheath from your bow, calling for many arrows. Selah. You split the earth with rivers. The mountains saw you and writhed. And the raging water swept on, and the deep gave forth its voice, and it lifted its hands on high. The sun and the moon stood still in their place at the light of your arrows as they sped at the flash of your glittering spear. You marched through the earth in fury. You threshed the nations in anger. You went out for the salvation of your people, for the salvation of your anointed. You crushed the head of the house of the wicked, laying him bare from thigh to neck, Selah. You pierced with his own arrows the heads of his warriors, who came like a whirlwind to scatter me, rejoicing as if to devour the poor in secret. You trampled the sea with your horses and the surging of mighty waters. And so the second image we need to see here is that nothing in the universe can stand opposed to God's work. Nothing in the universe can stand opposed to God's work. So again, as we behold the splendor of God, it comes not only from looking at him, but to seeing what he has done and what he will do. And so this is where Habakkuk's marvel shifts from beholding the Lord and the response to his presence. Again, what we saw here was that the Lord comes and he is present in the nations, and the mountains tremble and the hills bow down and the nations shake. And so there's that response to his presence. But now there's this shift to the power of God's work and what it means for the nations and what it means to witness the saving act of God. He continues using this vivid imagery. He describes the Lord as this great king who has entered his chariot, this powerful chariot. Right? And he draws his bow from the sheath, and he has his spear nearby, and he is ready to loose arrows against his enemies. He is ready to wage war, and as his chariot advances forward with haste. We are given a description of the response that nature itself gives to this movement. Again, where he's using this great poetic language to describe the response of creation to the saving work of God. And so as the Lord moves forth against his enemy, it's as if the rivers split to flee. I mean, you can think about rivers and how they branch off and go different ways. And what's being said here is that as you see those, as rivers branch off, that they move with intentionality to get out of his way. And what also we see here, it says that the sun and the moon stand still in their place, as if hey, we don't want to be a part of this. They stand still and just watch what is about to take place. The sun and the moon, they stand in place. They don't want to get in the way of what's coming. I mean, he moves in such great power that all of creation just stands in witness to his work. Nothing is getting in his way. Nothing is slowing him down. Nothing is going to prevent his work. You know, something that's become popular at outdoor sporting events, and here in Michigan, we don't really have any outdoor stadiums, so we don't really get this, but you'll see this like at college football games, is like fighter jets, like military fighter jets, flying over like the open stadium and flying and doing like, you know, this great display of kind of power and show, right? And even on watching it on TV, you can hear like the engine and the power of that jet as it flies over, as it cuts through the wind with this magnitude. But then you think about, for a moment, the context for which that jet was actually created. It wasn't just created to show signs of power. It was created to execute power, right? Because when a military jet is coming your way, there's nothing much you can do to stop it. It is going to accomplish what it sets forth to accomplish. Your natural instinct then is to get out of the way, to flee to safety, to be as far away from that powerful thing as possible. You don't want to be a part of anything that's about to take place. And this is what we see happening in our text. Yeah, the description isn't just of people fleeing, but rather the great things of creation, getting out of the way. Again, God's plans are intentional. God doesn't wake up on a Sunday morning and say, you know, maybe I'm going to go dwell with my people today. Or he didn't wake up in days past and say, you know what, maybe it's time to send forth the Messiah. Or even further back to what we're talking about here, when Habakkuk's thinking of Egypt being delivered from Israel, he didn't think, well, you know what, today is finally the day. I woke up. No, God has these great plans. And he executes them with great power. And we see that nothing stands in his way. Nothing. I mean, if the heaven and the moons, the heavens and the stars and the sun, and none of that can stand in his way, what can stand in his way? As these things come and they flee out of his presence, the Lord comes upon his enemy with great power. And the text says that he not only prevails, but he absolutely crushes the wicked. Absolutely crushes the wicked. What is remarkable is that this description of what takes place, again, isn't a one-off description. We see, again, this really powerful, poetic language. But what if? What if we actually saw a literal example of creation responding to the saving work of God? What if? Well, the Gospel of Matthew gives us these details concerning the death of Christ in Matthew 27, starting in verse 50. It says, "And Jesus cried out again with a loud voice and yielded up his spirit. And behold, the curtain of the temple was torn in two from top to bottom, and the earth shook, and the rocks were split, and the tombs were also opened, and many bodies of the saints who had fallen asleep were raised, and coming out of the tombs after his resurrection, they went into the holy city and appeared to many. When the centurion and those who were with him, keeping watch over Jesus, saw the earthquake and what took place, they were filled with awe and said, 'Truly, this was the Son of God.'" While to the world, we present the death of Christ, and they would determine that as a defeat, what we see in the text is the total opposite. It is God continuing to move in majesty, his matchless majesty. Christ died a death so that death would die. And in this moment of divine power, what do we see? We see that the earth shakes and the rocks split open and the veil in the temple tears in two. And here, even the Roman pagan soldiers who were just mocking him and beating him, look and they see how the earth responds to the saving power of God through Christ Jesus, and they are filled with awe. They are filled with the splendor of God's work as they behold the earth respond first. You notice in the text, the earth responds first. Death responds next, because the dead come back to life. And then finally, the pagan sees it, and behold, they are filled with awe and seeing the power of God. This is the same glorious reality that we live in today. God continues to move in majesty, his matchless majesty. He still acts with power. You see, because it is by the risen Jesus that God still brings the dead to life. I mean, talk about nothing stopping the plans of God. Nothing thwarting his power. Nothing that can stand in his way. Death, the grave, cannot stand in the way of God and the majesty of his power. Dead come to life. Nothing can thwart him. In fact, he crushes the enemy. We see that he has crushed death, and we were promised in Genesis chapter 3 that he would crush the skull of the enemy, Satan. And so we see the power of God in display continued in our lives today. There's nothing that can thwart the crushing of the enemy as he frees those who are in bondage to sin to walk in his righteousness. What a wonderful thing to witness this morning. I mean, I look at lives of people around me who didn't know Christ, who lived in opposition to him. And I think of my own life and the things that in my early 20s I strive for, and the things that I didn't care about. You know, it was funny. When I was taking the step into ministry, my brother had reached out to me, and this was a moment of God's power working in my life and a yielding to him. You know, my brother called me, and he had been at camp for the summer, and he had said to me, you know, the Lord has just put on my heart that, you know, I think he's calling you into ministry. He goes, I've been praying about sharing this with you because I thought you might, you know, get angry, because he knew how I had been living. I mean, he'd known the stories of the things I'd done. He had witnessed the things I was doing. And so the idea that after this summer that somehow he was going to share with me that God was calling to ministry, not knowing that the power of God had already been working in my life and in my heart, was an amazing revelation that took place in that moment for the both of us. Again, that God had a plan, right? That he was going to work, and that nothing I did or nothing I didn't do for that matter was going to thwart that. Nothing stands in opposition to the power of God. He is working out his plan of salvation. Church, my prayer for us this morning is that we would open our hearts to the splendor of who God is and his work. There's none like him. None who have the power he has. If the splendid things of this world have the ability to capture our attention, right? If we see remarkable feats of strength, remarkable feats of military power, and we look at that and our breath is taken away, how much more will the power of the one, the presence of the one who the mountains bow down to, capture it? The Lord has revealed himself. He has worked in our midst, and so let us leave here today with hearts of adoration for the one who is worthy of it.